Chapter 1: Early Life. A simple beginning. George Washington was born in 1732 in the British colony of Virginia. He did not grow up in a palace. His family owned land, but they were not rich or powerful. When George was only 11 years old, his father died. This moment changed his life. Without his father, George had to grow up quickly. He learned responsibility at a very young age. Unlike many leaders of his time, he did not study in Europe. His formal education was limited, but George was curious. He loved learning from books, from work, and from real life. As a teenager, he worked as a land surveyor. This job taught him discipline, patience, and attention to detail. He traveled through forests and rivers, measured land, and faced difficult conditions. These early experiences made him strong, practical, and independent. They prepared him for a future he could not yet imagine, a future that would change history. Chapter 2: A Young Soldier. Learning through failure. As George Washington grew older, he felt a strong desire to serve. At just 21 years old, he joined the British colonial military. At that time, the British Empire controlled the colonies, and Washington served under British command. He was young, ambitious, and eager to prove himself, but his early military career was not easy. Washington faced difficult missions in dangerous territory. He made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people. He underestimated the enemy. In one important mission, his troops were defeated and many soldiers were lost. This failure was painful and deeply humbling. But Washington did not give up. He learned from his mistakes. He studied military strategy. He observed experienced commanders. Slowly, he became more careful, more patient, and more disciplined. These early failures taught him a powerful lesson. True leadership is not born from success alone, but from learning after defeat, and these lessons would shape the leader he was about to become. Chapter 3: A colonial officer under British rule. After gaining more experience, George Washington became a respected colonial officer. He continued serving the British Empire, but something began to change inside him. Washington noticed that colonial officers were treated differently from British officers. They were paid less. They were rarely promoted. Their efforts were often ignored. At the same time, Britain placed heavy taxes on the colonies. The colonists had no voice in Parliament, yet they were forced to obey British laws. This created anger and frustration. Washington was a loyal officer, but he also cared deeply about his land and his people. He began to question British authority. Why should the colonies pay taxes without representation? Why should colonists fight wars without respect? Slowly, his loyalty to the crown weakened. Washington was no longer just a soldier. He was becoming a political thinker. The idea of independence was still dangerous, but it was no longer impossible. The path toward revolution had begun. Chapter 4: The Road to Revolution. Tensions between the colonies and Britain continued to grow. New taxes were created. New laws were enforced. Anger spread among the colonists. Many people began to speak openly about freedom and independence. Meetings were held. Ideas were shared. Voices became stronger. Washington was no longer silent. He joined other colonial leaders in political discussions about the future of the colonies. Soon, he became a member of the Continental Congress. This group represented the colonies and challenged British control. At first, many leaders hoped for peace. They wanted fair treatment, not war. But Britain refused to listen. Soldiers were sent. Weapons were used. Lives were lost. At this point, Washington understood something clearly. Freedom would not be given. It would have to be fought for. The moment of choice had arrived, and Washington was ready to take responsibility once again. Chapter 5. Commander of the Continental Army. War had begun. The colonies needed an army, but more than that, they needed a leader. Someone strong. Someone respected. In 1775, George Washington was chosen as commander of the Continental Army. It was not an easy honor. The army was weak. Many soldiers had no training. They lacked weapons, food, and uniforms. Some soldiers did not even have shoes. Washington accepted the role, knowing the risks. He refused a salary. He asked only to serve. He lived like his soldiers. He shared their hardships. He earned their respect through example. Discipline became his focus. Unity became his goal. Washington knew that victory would not come quickly, but he believed that courage, patience, and perseverance could overcome even the strongest empire. The revolution now had a leader, and there was no turning back. Chapter 6. Hard times and great sacrifices. The war did not go as planned. The Continental Army suffered many losses. Supplies were low. Hope was fading. One of the darkest moments came during the winter at Valley Forge. It was cold. It was harsh. And it was cruel. Soldiers had little food. Many had no proper clothes. Disease spread through the camp. Some men left the army. Others wanted to quit. But Washington stayed. He did not abandon his soldiers. He lived among them. He shared their suffering. Instead of giving up, he focused on training and discipline. He believed that a strong army was built in the hardest moments. Slowly, the soldiers became more organized, more united, more determined. Valley Forge was not a battlefield, but it was a test of endurance. Those who survived came out stronger, and so did their leader. Chapter 7. Turning points of the war. After the long winter, the Continental Army was different. The soldiers were better trained. They were more disciplined. They believed in their cause. Washington changed his strategy. He chose to fight smarter. He avoided unnecessary losses. He protected his army. He waited for the right moments. Slowly, important victories began to appear. These victories gave new hope to the colonies. Other nations started to notice. France decided to support the American cause. This support changed everything. With new supplies, weapons, and trained soldiers, the balance of the war began to shift. The British were no longer fighting a weak group of colonies. They were fighting a determined army with growing international support. The revolution was still dangerous, but for the first time, victory seemed possible. Chapter 8. Victory and the end of the war. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and uncertainty, the war reached its final stage. The Continental Army worked together with French forces. The British Army was tired. Their resources were limited. Their confidence was fading. In a decisive moment, British forces were surrounded and forced to surrender. The war was over. The colonies had won. A new nation was born. Across the land, people celebrated freedom and independence. And at the center of this victory stood George Washington. He was seen as a hero, a symbol of the revolution. Many expected him to take absolute power, as many leaders did in history. But Washington surprised the world. Instead of holding power, he prepared to give it up. His greatest act of leadership was still to come. Chapter 9. A leader who stepped away after the war ended. Many soldiers looked to Washington as their natural ruler. Some even believed he should become a king. At that time, this was common, but Washington thought differently. He believed that the revolution was not about replacing one ruler with another. It was about freedom. In a moment that shocked the world, Washington resigned as commander. He returned home. This simple act sent a powerful message. Leadership was not about control. It was about service. Washington proved that the new nation would be built on principles, not personal ambition. His decision became an example for future leaders everywhere. But his story was not finished. Soon, his country would need him once again. Chapter 10. From General to President. After returning home, George Washington hoped for a quiet life. He wanted to be a farmer again. He wanted peace. But the new nation faced serious problems. The states were divided. The government was weak. Many leaders believed only one man could unite the country. Once again, Washington was called to serve. He helped guide the creation of a new constitution. When the time came to choose a president, the decision was clear. George Washington was elected as the first president of the United States. He accepted the role with humility and caution. There was no example to follow. Every decision he made would shape the future of the nation. Washington knew the responsibility was enormous, but his duty was not finished. Chapter 11. His presidency, power with limits. As president, George Washington understood one thing clearly: power must have limits. Washington worked to unite the states, not to divide them. He believed disagreement was natural, but unity was essential. Washington avoided unnecessary wars. He wanted peace, not expansion through violence. After 2 terms in office, he made a historic decision. He refused a 3rd term. By stepping away, Washington showed the world that leadership was temporary. The nation mattered more than the man. His presidency proved that strong leadership and humility could exist together. Chapter 12. Legacy. The father of a nation. When George Washington left the presidency, its foundations were strong. He did not leave behind a crown. He left behind principles. Washington became known as the father of the nation, not because he ruled with force, but because he led with character. His example influenced future presidents and inspired leaders around the world. Even today, his choices remind us that true leadership is built on integrity. Greatness does not come from seeking power, but from answering a call to serve. Conclusion: greatness without ambition. George Washington changed history without trying to dominate it. He was a soldier who learned through failure, a leader who shared hardship, a president who knew when to step away. In a world where many fight for power, he chose restraint. The strongest leaders are often the ones who never wanted to rule. They simply chose to serve when history called. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and subscribe to Talky English. Leave a comment and tell us which historical figure you want to learn about next. See you in the next story.